There we go. All right. And thank you for having me. And here's hoping that we don't lose power. Um, so, unlike a couple of years ago where I had to do it al fresco outside in real life. But here we go. Again, my name is Cora Manuel. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at Mills College. I have been in financial aid for over 20 years and seen a lot of changes, especially in tuition costs. So, for tonight, hopefully, we'll be able to go through everything you need to know about financial aid in about 35 minutes or less to um, save all of the questions for afterwards. Can you see the presentation? Okay, great. All right, let's see. So tonight we're going to go over again a few things. What is financial aid? We'll talk a lot about acronyms in the financial aid world. COA, cost of attendance, EFC, expected family contribution. What is this term, financial need? All the different kinds of financial aid that's being offered, the different applications, including the federal applications and special circumstances. So, again, what is financial aid? Because all of you parents are able to write that check for your students to go to Stanford and Yale and Harvard, right? No? Okay. Well, this is what financial aid is there. It is to help the families and students address and fund some of those educational expenses for the students when they go to college, university, or any of the trade tech schools. Yeah, I'm going backwards. Okay. So our first acronym, cost of attendance. Every single campus, school, university has their own cost of attendance because it is made out of their actual tuition and fees that are charged to the students. There is a line item, a budget item for room and board should the students decide to either live on campus, so for the dorm or meal plan. If student will be living at home with a parent, there is a small cost associated with that. Or if the students will be living off campus in a rented apartment, again, there's that line item as well. The other expenses are estimates as far as books and supplies. Again, those can change and vary from major to major. Science books may be a bit more expensive than paperback books for English. Transportation costs, we include that as far as the minimum cost of taking BART or community county connection, and we're not talking about getting a new Tesla. So that is, again, we can include information regarding transportation if your students are going to be attending out of state. Some schools can add to the cost of attendance round trip airfare, maybe twice a year for coming home for holidays or for end of the academic year, as well as including miscellaneous personal expenses. That can be buying a new sweatshirt for the school that your students are attending, or if they are tired of what is being served in the cafeteria, maybe going out for a pizza or another hamburger at In-N-Out. So again, those are some of the things that are included in the cost of attendance. The second acronym, EFC, is the expected family contribution, and that is the result from the applications, either the federal application, the free application for federal student aid FAFSA, or the California Dream Act application. It is the results of the information that is entered, the income of the family, the tax liability of the family. If the student is working, that information is also included. So again, this is just in theory what either the federal government or state of California thinks. Based on that information, the family can contribute to the student's costs while attending school. And using those two, cost of attendance and EFC, we come up with the financial need. And the financial need is what most colleges and universities, the financial aid offices try to fill with all the free money, the good stuff, the scholarships, the grants, subsidized loans. Again, that is what is financial need, and a lot of schools do talk about that when they send out financial aid offers. The categories of financial aid, there is need-based and merit-based or non-need-based aid. Need-based aid, again, is looking at the results from the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, and sometimes the CSS profile, which is another application that only a handful of schools in California require and about 200 across the country. So again, that looks at the finances of the family, what they are able to contribute, versus the non-need based aid, merit-based aid, which can be, again, determined by looking at the student's GPA or test scores or athletic grants or music scholarships. Again, something that doesn't look at the family's finances but looks at the student's abilities, looking at tryouts or auditions, or even submitting possibly portfolios depending on the award and major the student is looking at. The different types of financial aid, we have self-help and we have gift aid. Gift aid is, of course, the best because it is the free money, and scholarships and grants, those terms are pretty interchangeable. Again, that is the free money. Versus self-help, which is the loans, which can be in the student's name or the parent's name, or student may be eligible for receiving federal work study or state work study from the California schools. It can vary from school to school. So those are the different types of financial aid that are available. And then where does all those funds come from? So there are several sources of financial aid. Federal government is the largest source of financial aid. That would be the federal Pell Grant or the loans for the student and the parent. Most of it is based on financial need. Again, looking at the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. In order to be eligible for and to renew and receive financial aid every year, the FAFSA has to be completed every year, and eligibility requirements must be met. These are the many different types of federal programs available. Again, the federal Pell Grant is the most known, as well as the direct loans. The Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, lovingly known as FSEOG, because I can't say Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant every 5 minutes. So FSEOG. That varies from school to school. Each school has a different allocation. So if one school offers your student a supplemental education grant, but another school does not, that means, again, most schools don't get the same amount of allocation from the federal government. Federal work study is about the same as well. Each school has a different allocation. So you can ask the students if they're interested in working on campus. They just need to complete that little box on the FAFSA that they're interested. Federal direct loans, again, can be for the student in the student's name, or the Federal Plus loans can be in the parent's name when the students are still attending their undergraduate degree. Once your student decides to go for their master's or doctorate degrees, then they can be eligible for a Federal Graduate Plus loan. States, state of California, again, they have the Cal Grant or the Middle Class Scholarship Grant. Again, students have to be, again, graduating from a California high school and attending a California school, college, or university. The Cal Grant is based on both merit and financial need. So the Cal Grant has a minimum 2.0 GPA. The California Student Aid Commission has already received the GPAs of your student, and then they will be looking to match either the FAFSA or the California Dream Act application with a GPA, and then they will send out information if your student is eligible for any of the Cal grants at the various schools in California. The middle class scholarship typically is offered later, as it is based on the student attending either a UC or a Cal State University campus. So for a California Student Aid Commission, the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application must be completed by March 2nd in order to be eligible for the Cal grant. Other states may have various different types of awards, again, and they may have different types or various deadlines, but you may want to check those requirements or criteria if your student is looking to attend a California university outside of California. The California Dream Act application is for students who are either underdocumented or undocumented and do not have a U.S. citizenship or permanent resident. Students who are, again, U.S. citizens or do have that permanent resident alien status. You may want to discuss the WUI, Western Undergraduate Exchange Program, with your counselors. Again, this is 16 states participate in this program. That is, if your student decides to go to any of the Western states, schools in Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Nevada, and other neighboring states, they can participate and only pay the equivalent to attending a California state school, either UC or CSU. So instead of paying the out-of-state fees, they would pay maybe the same or just a little bit more than being in state. So talk to your counselors about that to see if that would be helpful in addressing some of those tuition and fees from out of state. The colleges and universities themselves, they have all kinds of financial aid. It can be either need-based or merit-based. Again, looking at the websites of the schools your students are looking to apply for admission, if there is an additional application that is required, if the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application in California has an earlier deadline, please review those dates. Again, it can be gift aid, it can be loans, it could be, again, some schools have their own loan programs or different work study program. So go ahead and take a look at all of their websites to review that information. As I mentioned earlier, some of the private schools in California require the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application. Again, it could be, I think University of Santa Clara, University of Southern California, Stanford, and a few more in California require the CSS profile versus a couple hundred across the country. So the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application are free. The CSS profile does charge for each school that requires this application. So please review, again, the websites of the various schools to see if this CSS profile is required. The FAFSA and the DREAM Act application have about 100 questions, and the CSS profile is a little bit more and has about 400 questions. So they ask a lot more information that is required. Other private sources, you can also look for scholarships through typical businesses or other charities, deadlines, applications. They can vary from organization and company. Start looking for private outside scholarships now, I highly recommend that students have a separate email account for all these scholarship applications so they don't get lost in all of the other emails that the students are receiving. Continue to look for scholarships all throughout the student's educational career when they're attending college to help reduce the charges and tuition. Again, looking at some places of employment for the student or the parent, they may have some scholarship opportunities or educational benefits. So, for example, if parents were working at Mills College, after 6 months, tuition for their students will be free for undergraduates. So there are some openings. You could take a look at that. Or again, looking at other opportunities that are available. So again, the main application that is required is the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. It's going to ask for information from the parents' income tax returns. It's going to ask for the colleges and universities that your students are applying for admission. If they want to receive financial aid there, they will list that on the FAFSA, and it's available in both English and Spanish. October 1st was the first date to complete the FAFSA, and it will be for the 2022-2023 academic year, so starting next fall. Again, review and ask the different colleges, universities if there are different priority dates to complete this application. CSU Sonoma, I believe, used to have an earlier priority date of end of January, and I know my former school that I used to work at, St. Mary's College of California, they also had a priority date of February 15th. So please double check those websites or ask any of the financial aid offices or the admissions counselors at the schools your students are looking at. Various ways to complete the federal application: doing it on the web, doing it on the mobile app on your phone if you want to do that, doing it by paper. It's still available, but that takes a lot longer. FAFSA on the phone, that's calling the federal student aid, the U.S. Department of Education. Or if you need additional assistance, the FAA Access or financial aid administrators at the various offices, financial aid offices, can assist if they are available to do so. Again, doing it on the web, FAFSA on the web or on the mobile app, it has all these built-in edits, so it will prevent a lot of errors. Also, skip logic. If you answer certain questions in a particular way, it may allow you to skip 10 to 20 questions. So again, doing it online is preferable. Also, you will have the option to authorize the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, to actually transfer the information, the income and asset information and tax liability from your information on your tax returns directly onto the FAFSA. So that will save some time and also make a lot of the financial aid administrators happy because they can see that the information is correct and has flowed through. Again, doing it online, it's much quicker. It will be processed in about 3 days versus doing it on paper can take up to 8 weeks to process. There are little help bubbles next to the questions on the FAFSA on the web. And then also you can, and the students can always go back and check on the status of the application, the FAFSA. And then it also makes it easier when you renew it every year because all of the demographic information will already be there. You will just need to update the information of the income and taxes and assets. Again, as I mentioned, the IRS data retrieval tool helps to transfer the information from the particular tax returns that is requiring the information. That's only available on the FAFSA, not on the DREAM Act application. Again, it will reduce any documents that any of the financial aid offices may ask to see. The FSA ID is required for both the student and the parent to electronically sign the FAFSA. You will be able to also use this FSA ID to sign any loan agreements, for the federal loans for either the student or the parent. You will use this FSA ID for all future years in renewing the FAFSA. Again, one parent has to have one and the student has to have one. If there are multiple students attending college, each of those students will have their own separate FSA ID because it is tied to their social security number. Okay. So when doing the FAFSA, again, for the students, it asks for a social security number, citizenship status, the marital status. The question regarding the highest education level completed by the student's father or mother is actually a question for the California Student Aid Commission in awarding the Cal grants. So please make sure that is appropriate response is provided. I get a lot of questions of how do I make my student independent? So there are quite a few questions on the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application that will determine if the student is dependent and will require parent income and asset information to be provided, or if any of the questions responding will be yes, then the student will be considered independent and then will not require the parent's information. So in order to be, the student needs to be an independent student, they need to be over the age of 24, married, attending a program that is their master's degree or doctorate degree, if they're veterans of the armed forces. So there's quite a few questions there to make that determination. So parents, again, for our dependent students, it's going to ask for the tax liability, the income, the other financial information. If parents are dislocated worker, that definition is on the FAFSA. If the family has been receiving any federal benefits, the means tested federal benefits, it asks for the assets of the family and untaxed income. And then also the same questions about income and assets for the student. And again, if the student is an older student and is married and has a spouse, all that information will also be asked on the FAFSA and will need to be provided. Again, on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, you can list up to 10 schools to receive the information to apply for financial aid. And if the student is applying for more than 10 schools, say for example 22 schools, then the student would first submit either the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application with the first set of 10 schools with the housing plans, living on campus, off campus, or living at home. Submit that FAFSA with the first 10. Students will receive the results of the FAFSA in about 3 days if done online. Student will then go back onto the website, delete those 10 schools, add the next set of 10. Submit again, wait another 3 or 4 days for the results to come back, and then go back on and delete those second set of 10 schools and add the next 2. Okay, so then all 22 schools would be able to receive that information. We may not be able to see it or retrieve the information and download that into our campus databases, as our systems probably have not yet been updated yet, but we will still be able to review the information looking at the federal website or the state website. The California Student Aid Commission will have the information for the DREAM Act application. If you are planning to pay someone to complete the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, Their information will need to be provided on the applications, as both the federal government and the state of California do track that information, because again, these applications are free to complete, and you do not necessarily need to pay someone to complete that for you. There may be some opportunities to have cash for college events across the county for assistance in having either financial aid officers or volunteers to help complete the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application. So again, signatures are required. The student has to sign it, and one parent has to sign for the dependent students. Again, doing it electronically using the FSA ID, or if you want to just print out the signature page and sign and send that in, or completing the paper FAFSA. Also requires the wet signatures to be submitted and mailed to the Central Processing System, CPS, for the FAFSA, or to the California Student Aid Commission for the DREAM Act application. This is a list of a lot of frequent errors on either the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application. For the FAFSA, the Social Security numbers, please make sure that you are not transposing numbers. Makes it difficult for sometimes the school and to match up the FAFSA with their application. If parents are divorced or widowed or remarried, who actually provides that information on the FAFSA. The parent who has custody of the student will report the information, or the parent who provides more than 50% of support will be the parent that provides that information. If that parent is remarried, then the new spouse will also appear. Their information will be reported on the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application. Same for income earned by parent or step-parent. Regardless of any prenuptial agreements, that information has to appear and be reported on the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application. What is untaxed income? There's a lot of definitions of what that can be. The typical untaxed income question is the contributions to your retirement accounts. It does not look at the actual account itself, what the value is of the retirement account, the IRA, the KEO, or any 403Bs, but what you are contributing, that is considered untaxed income. The U.S. income tax is paid. That is not the amount of check that is written to the IRS. It is what the actual tax liability is. So there is a line item on the 1040 that is defined on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application in one of the little help bubbles. Household size, who's in the family, who is residing underneath your roof. Again, that can vary. If the students are living on campus, they are still considered dependent and part of the household. If there are any other relatives that are living with the family and parents are providing at least 50% of support, they are included in the household size. Number of household members in college. If it's a two-parent family and one student, and the student's completing the FAFSA, so then there will be one in college. If one of the parents decides to go to back to school for their college or university, and they're going full-time, the younger student will be household member in college would be one, but on the parents' FAFSA or DREAM Act application, the number of students in college will be two. Clear as mud? Yeah, absolutely. Clear as mud. Real estate and investment net worth, again, on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, do not report the value of your primary home. You will report that on the CSS profile for any of those schools that require that. Again, real estate and investment net worth will be looking at your vacation homes, any rental properties, farms, businesses, again, those will be required on the FAFSA on the DREAM Act application. Again, the little help bubbles on the side will help you determine what that could be and how to answer those questions. So we hit submit for the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application. What happens next? For the FAFSA, hit submit. It goes to the CPS, Central Processing System. Again, 3 days for it to process. The student receives the results of the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, and the school, college, university also sees the information. If there is a valid email that was provided, the student will get a student aid report, SAR. Please review that to make sure all the information is correct. Again, at this point, you can verify which 10 schools have access to that FAFSA, and the students can go back online to delete those 10 and add the second set of 10. If there was no valid FAFSA, no valid email provided, then a paper student aid report, SAR, will be sent, or an acknowledgement that it was processed. The schools don't receive a SAR, they receive another acronym, ISIR, Institutional Student Information Record, which includes all of the information from the FAFSA or, again, the DREAM Act applications. The schools will be able to see the information on either the federal website or the California Student Aid Commission website until we are able to retrieve that information electronically and import that into our various databases. If you need to make corrections, again, student, parent going back online to either the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, or doing it on paper. You may need to submit documents, supporting documents to either the schools, so either you can make the corrections, students and parents, or the school will make that correction on your behalf. So when we look at the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, it asks basic questions. Again, only about 100 questions. So there may be some special circumstances that you cannot explain on those two applications. For example, the FAFSA is asking for the information from the federal income tax return 1040 from 2 years ago. Things kind of may have changed within the last couple of years, so you cannot put that information or explain it to the federal government or the California Student Aid Commission. You will need to send that information directly to the financial aid offices of the schools your students are applying to. Those colleges and universities may actually ask for other documents to support the changes, if there was a change in income, or if there were some other things that have affected this family's finances. Again, you will need to send that directly to the schools, colleges, and universities. Again, this is a short list of things that the schools can take into consideration. Not all schools are able to or will do that. So again, either contacting the schools directly sooner rather than later, even before the student has been admitted, but at the same time or after you've submitted the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application. The CSS profile, again, that has 400 questions, that actually has a section to explain any special circumstances that the family has been experiencing that may affect their ability to assist their student in addressing their charges, tuition, fees at the various campuses, colleges, and universities. So this presentation, again, another lovely acronym, NASFA, the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. Again, you have the actual handout was provided in the chat, I believe, or the Q&A. Here's some other resources, some other websites. StudentAid.gov is the federal website. CSAC.ca.gov is the California Student Aid Commission to review the information regarding Cal Grants or the middle class scholarship. Again, your high school counselors are able to assist with all these other questions. Talking to the various financial aid offices that your students are applying to, make friends with them, get their business cards, give them candy, chocolates, flowers, just kidding. Or again, looking for other outside scholarships. These two, fastweb.com, scholarships.com, are the largest national databases for scholarships, outside scholarships. Again, highly recommend that the students have a separate scholarship or a separate email account for these scholarships, because when the students go in to create their profile, they will then start receiving all kinds of different applications for scholarships, and then it's up to the student to actually apply to see if it actually fits who they are, what their major is going to be, or their hobbies. So for them to take a look at that, fastweb.com or scholarships.com. Naviance as well has a lot of scholarships available. And, ladies and gentlemen, this is my direct email address. If you have questions about what some of the other schools, colleges, universities have sent to you, or are asking additional information, please feel to reach out to me. Again, we got financial aid in about 36 minutes, so I can actually talk hours regarding each individual type of financial aid that's available, each different kinds of awards, but feel free to reach out and send me your questions. And it looks like we have a lot of questions.
Okay, so I did receive a few questions, both in the chat and through the Q&A. I received one just anonymously. I am a single mom with 4 kids, but do not claim my 2 youngest kids on my taxes. So am I a household of 3 or 5?
So if you are providing more than 50% support for those students, regardless of who claims them on the tax returns, if you're providing 50%, then it would be a household of 5.
Okay, thank you. We also have another question regarding 529s and if they are taken into consideration. I think the answer for this for the FAFSA, California DREAM Act, and CSS profile may be a little different if I recall correctly. So if you can speak to that for a minute.
So the 529s, again, the most common answer you'll get from any financial aid administrator is it depends. It depends on who owns the 529. If the parent owns, or one of the parents owns 529s for all the students, then all of that has to be reported on the FAFSA. Even if it's only one student currently and will be attending college, university, you will need to report all the value of all the 529s. If the 529 is in the name of a lovely grandparent or relative, then it does not appear on the FAFSA until you withdraw those funds and then use it for the student's educational expenses. It will then be reported as untaxed income in the following FAFSA year or DREAM Act application year.
Thank you for answering. So we have another question. So you need to know what colleges you are applying to, then you need to wait. I'm not entirely sure what they mean about the waiting period there.
So it is kind of like one of those hurry up and wait. Hurry up to complete the FAFSA as soon, or the DREAM Act application as soon as possible, because a lot of schools may run out of money. So the sooner you have that information to the schools and universities, especially if they have early priority dates to complete those applications. Um, Again, making submitting the information earlier, and then if you need to make corrections later, that's fine. But again, you can make corrections at any time after completing the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application. Even that question about the 529, yes, you can definitely go online to the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application and enter that information.
Okay. And another question, my student is applying for early action, which has FAFSA deadline of November 15th. Will the same application be used for regular application submissions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And in general, what's the next step after filling out the FAFSA?
Filling out the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, again, it's hurry up and wait. Hurry up to complete as best as possible to meet any early deadlines. And then the financial aid offices will then match up that application to the student's admission application. Once the students have been admitted, then financial aid offers will be sent out to students. And again, it can vary from school to school when those are released. They can be released at the same time as admissions, or the admissions information, admission letter is sent, and then maybe a month or two after that, a financial aid offer will then either could be sent out in the mail in a nice big envelope, or the students would be contacted to log into a student portal through the California or through the school, college, university in order to review the different financial aid that is being offered to them for that particular school, university.
Okay. We have, how about 401k or IRA for retired parents? Is that reported?
So the retirement accounts themselves are not reported as assets. Only the annual contributions that you have been putting into those retirements on an annual basis, that is considered untaxed income and is reported on the FAFSA. If the parents are retired and are already drawing from those accounts, it will be reported on the income tax return already in the adjusted gross income, and that will be reported on the FAFSA.
Perfect. And then for the Cal Grant, when do we set up the My Grant Info account? And when does the school confirm the GPA?
So it's my understanding that the district has already submitted the GPAs to the California Student Aid Commission. So students can already go and set up their My Grant Info csac.ci.gov account, so they can see and check that the California Student Aid Commission has received the GPA, or and is missing the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, or the other way around, that the FAFSA or DREAM Act application has been received but not the GPA, so that the students can go and talk to the counselors and verify that the GPA has been submitted or will need to be resubmitted.
Okay. And then I have which tax year, which year tax return is considered. If there have been changes in family situation or income since then, how can we make them known to FAFSA or the institutions?
So again, the FAFSA is going to be asking for the income tax information from 2020. And again, you will need to answer the questions directly. I mean, copy the information from the 2020 income tax return 1040, and then you will contact the schools directly to let them know the changes in the income or the family's assets, because again, you need to report what was on the income tax return, and maybe different in 2020 than happens to be 21, or should anything happen in 22, again, you need to contact the schools themselves, look at their websites to see if there's a particular process that needs to be followed, any kind of, or what documentation those schools are requiring to make those federal or state exceptions to those applications.
Thank you. Does applying for financial aid in any way negatively affect the student's acceptance chances?
It depends on the school. If admissions can either take a look at that information, if the schools are need blind, then they don't look at the FAFSA for admissions. Some schools can take a look at that and they make their decisions on admission. But again, those schools would require those applications, either the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application. In addition, the CSS profile will need to be completed.
Okay. And do both the parent and the student enter financial information on the FAFSA?
Yes, if your student is again considered a dependent student for the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, the parent will need to provide the income and asset and tax information on the FAFSA until your student no longer is determined to be dependent and will be considered independent, again based on age over 23, if they are veterans of the armed forces or married, or other, again looking at the other questions that determine dependency for the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application.
Okay. Which parent files when you have divorced families with 50-50 custody and 50% child financial contributions? How do you add two divorced parents' income info into the financial aid documents?
So the FAFSA, again, is going to be asking for the custodial parent who pays more than 50% support. There's 365 days in a year. Who did the last support check? So parents can typically review that information. Again, if there are questions, and possibly going to the financial aid office of the top 2 or 3 schools that your student is looking at and pose that question to them. They can then definitely help with that answer, and they may have different answers. So again, asking those questions to those different schools.
Thank you. So you have to apply for CSS and FAFSA? Question mark.
So it depends on the schools that your students are applying to. Again, it's mostly private schools, independent colleges and universities that require the CSS profile. 200 or so across the country, maybe less than 6, half a dozen, less than 10 in California require the CSS profile. Again, that would be University of Southern California, Stanford, University of Santa Clara, the Claremont schools, I think Scripps University. So again, reviewing the websites, the financial aid offices of the schools and universities your students are applying to review what different applications are required. Again, if those particular schools have their own applications for their various grants and scholarships, they too may also have different applications that are required, so you may want to take a look at that.
Okay. Are we required to submit bank statements?
It depends. If you are submitting special circumstances, that perhaps there is more funds in your account currently that are earmarked for a specific use. For example, a lot of folks that were affected by the fires, there may be some insurance money that they are holding on to in order to rebuild. Again, that can be taken into consideration by some of the schools. So you will need to, again, contact the schools individually and let them know that's what is there. Provide those bank statements. Again, it will depend on what the schools are looking for.
Okay. And then I do have an attendee who is asking, should we just apply / fill out all the websites you sent to us just to be safe? Feeling overwhelmed, sigh.
I understand completely. Um, I always tell a lot of the younger financial aid administrators that once they get past 3 years, they're lifers because we understand all the changes in the applications. And again, a lot of times they change, a lot of the questions change. The FAFSA is a slightly different this year than it was last year. A lot of the requirements can change. So definitely, for at least for the first year, complete the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application to see if you are eligible for anything for federal financial aid or state financial aid. And again, even if you don't qualify for any of the need based financial aid, for the federal student loans, those would be automatically offered to the student once the FAFSA is completed. Also, again, if there are any special circumstances that happen midway through the academic year, something happened. I have had that experience where a student was not eligible for a Cal Grant at the beginning of the school year, but there were some changes, and I was able to retroactively get that student a Cal Grant for the fall semester, even though we were submitting changes at the beginning of the spring semester. So definitely completing the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application. Again, CSS profile will be required for those schools that are asking for it, in addition to the FAFSA.
Also, just because we are coming up on time, I want to, let everyone know that we are recording this webinar, and so you will have the opportunity to, go back, watch any of the segments that you may want some more clarity on or wanted to refresh your memories on. And I will be sending out all of the links that I sent through the chat, anything that was referenced through the entire video. And then on top of that, any additional resources, including the handout for the presentation, will be sent out again too. Okay. And so we do have a few more minutes. So do you mind if I go through more Q&A questions?
Let's do it.
All right. So I have a question. Do I fill out the FAFSA and then contact the college about financial changes from 2020 to current?
Yes, FAFSA at the same time, submit the FAFSA and then contact the schools. Again, the schools may not be importing or downloading the information into their campus databases, but they will be able to review that information on the federal website and then request the various supporting documentation.
Okay. Are VA disability payments reported as non-taxable income?
It depends on the type of benefit that the student is receiving, or if it's in the parent's name. The different GI benefits, the different chapters have different requirements and have different reporting criteria as well.
If the household income is over 1 million a year, what is the likelihood of getting approved for financial aid?
Let's see, who can I use? The Pitt Jolie family will qualify for financial aid. The Gates family can qualify for financial aid. It may be loans in the student's name, or the parent can take out a Parent Plus loan. But again, The merit-based scholarships and grants do not look at the income and assets of the family. So, again, completing the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application for the first year will give you an idea of what the schools would be able to offer as far as need based aid. But merit based, again, will look at the talents of the student, if it's GPA, if it's test scores, again, if it's athletic, or again, music or art. So there are different kinds of scholarships and grants that don't necessarily look at the income or assets of the family. Again, looking at outside scholarship search engines such as fastweb.com, scholarships.com, or even through Naviance. Those will have other scholarships and grants that the students can apply and compete for, that again will not look at information, the income and asset information of the family.
Okay. We also want to remind everyone that when setting up for financial aid applications for students and parents, not to use their school email when you know joining the websites or anything or setting up your accounts, just because our students will not have access to those school emails after graduation. And so may have trouble getting into their financial aid accounts after the fact, which can be very problematic. And so we'd like to avoid those as much as possible. So to use your personal emails in order to create those accounts. And I'm going to go with two more questions since we have 2 more minutes. If I'm moving out of California right at the end of the school year, should I still put my current address into FAFSA?
You can put your current address, and then once you do move and um, start your residency in a different state, you will just go back online to the FAFSA and make that correction.
Okay. And then my parents are day traders. Does that count as dislocated workers?
That's a good question. That's the first time I've ever heard that question. Um, I think I will have to research that one and get back to the counselors and see what that actually is. That is yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm always looking for those questions that stump the trainer.
That was a first for me as well. So I'm going to go ahead and include your contact information in the chat again. And reminder, we are going to be sending out this presentation and our contact information along with it. So just as a heads up, and all of the links that we provided. We do have 1 more minute, so I just wanted to take a moment to say to Cora for being our presenter and sharing all of your wealth of knowledge with us, and for sharing your contact information and being willing to answer any particular questions that they may not have answered or asked in the chat or in the Q&A. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you to all the families coming in for, looking for that information to assist your students, and students for wanting to make sure that you have the appropriate information for yourselves as well.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I'm going to go ahead and end our meeting. I do want to make sure that we end on time. So thank you, everyone, and we'll go ahead and end.